All right, so this presentation is all about mini grants for those who are seeking out funding opportunities. If you hear me sneeze, it's because I'm having some sinus issues. Please have patience with me. This video should be pretty quick. Let's consider this a mini presentation. All right. So, we're going to start off with what is a grant, and here is my personal definition of a grant. As a monetary resource, it's distributed by an institution, the federal, state, or local government, usually in response to a specific societal issue for a targeted purpose or population. So the institution could be a nonprofit institution, it could be a foundation, it could be a corporation, and then we've also got different branches of government that distribute grants. Now, the types of grants they distribute, we've been going over for the past month now. So, this is Grant Series Part 4, and today we're going to focus specifically on mini grants. So, what makes a grant mini? So, to think about mini grants, we did quickly go over a summary of what a mini grant was in our Introduction to Grant series in Part 1. Check that out if you haven't already. But mini grants are usually on average less than $1,000. Now you might see some that are 1,500. You might see some that are a couple or a few thousand. It really depends on the institution that's distributing it, what they consider to be mini. But for nonprofits, it's usually going to be less than $1,000. Corporations or governments might consider a mini grant something that's less than $5,000. But most mini grants that you see are going to be distributed by nonprofits and foundations. So that is why I have the amount average based around that. Now, mini grants are often redistributed by nonprofits to other social good organizations like other nonprofits or organizations that do nonprofit oriented work. But depending on the grant, it might be given to an LLC. It might be given to something that isn't even an incorporated entity. So just because you don't have an LLC or a formation on the type of group you're doing work through, for example, maybe you're a grassroots group that distributes food to folks who are transitioning through a period of homelessness, but you haven't formalized an entity. You haven't gone through the process of getting a nonprofit status or applied for an LLC. Mini grants are a great way to get access to funding. They're also very widely promoted, more promoted than other grants. And there's a very quick turnaround. So that's something to pay attention to with mini grants. When you come across it, make sure that you apply that same day because it could be closing relatively quickly. But what makes a grant mini is the fact that it's a reallocation of resources. So usually a much larger institution is trickling that money down to smaller groups. That larger institution could be a nonprofit, it could be a government, a branch of government, it could be a foundation, and that money could trickle down from the foundation to the nonprofit to a grassroots group like yourself. So, when thinking about the application process, the great thing about mini grants and why you should consider applying for them quickly when you come across them is the fact that the applications aren't nearly as long, drawn out, or stringent as most grants. All the grants that we covered in weeks up to this point have very stringent and tedious applications that require a lot of footwork and sometimes research and reporting. Mini grants aren't like that at all. And like I said in the previous slide, they don't require an organizational affiliation all the time, and they're dispersed through larger entities. Now, the criteria that you're going to need to keep track of when you're applying for a mini grant or have ready when you're applying for a mini grant is your identifying information for yourself as an individual or your organization if you have one. The organizational affiliation is optional, like I said. Now, mini grants could be for a specific activity or specific event. So make sure that you have that planned out and that it's something that you're going to be doing whether you get the grant funding or not. That's something that they're going to want to see. The fact that they're supporting something that you plan to do. You're not just coming up with something in order to get these funds. Make sure that you are very specific about who's going to be served through the grant, what the goals are, and how much money you need. Evaluation. Optimizing grant funds for maximum impact will require an evaluation plan. So, some questions to consider when you're evaluating how you're going to be executing this event. You need to be thinking about what are the services you're providing, the resources you're providing, what activity you're going to be doing, how you're going to measure the success of the activity. For example, let's stick with the food giveaway for people who are transitioning through homelessness. How many people are you planning to target with the food? The food itself is the resource, but maybe you're providing other resources. Maybe you're providing hygiene materials like deodorants, toothbrushes, toothpaste, blankets, other types of materials or tools or resources. You'll want to make sure that you have measured all that. How do you know that you've been successful? Maybe you're measuring your success by the number of people that you're serving. Maybe you're measuring your success by the testimonials, by what people are saying in response to the goods that you're distributing. So make sure you think about that. Criteria for approval is tied to the evaluation plan. So think about those two things hand in hand. All right? Passion inspires success. Okay? So if you're passionate about it, you will be successful. So there's a very quick timeline when it comes to when the grant is being put out, the judging period, and the grant dispersal period. So there are actions that are taking place between the grantees and the grantor. The grantees are the people that are receiving the funds. The grantor are the people who are dispersing the funds. So the RFP, which is language that we learned earlier in the month, the request for a proposal will open. It might not always be called an RFP, but that is some language that I really want you to be familiar with. If you see an RFP, you'll also know that it's open to LLCs, individuals. They're looking for a proposal, an idea that they want to see implementing strategies towards accomplishing a specific goal or serving a specific population. So when you see that RFP is open, you're going to submit your application as soon as possible. Then that's your action. Then the next action is for the grantor. They're going to close the application and judging will commence. And I'll say that's in less than, I'll say 2 months on average. Sometimes it's a month that these mini grants are open, because it might say that it's open for 3 months or 90 days or whatever the case, a month and a half. But when the money runs out, the application portal is closing. So you want to be among the first people that are putting in your proposal. You're going to be planning the activity regardless, because this is something that you want to do. So you'll begin planning the activity towards executing this event or this activity. The grant will be dispersed to you, and then you'll execute that activity or that event. Okay? Very quick turnaround. So, tips for a successful grant that I want you to keep in mind is, remember to quantify your request. So, that means wherever you can put numbers, put numbers. Don't just say general statements. Make sure that you're specific about the number of people you want to help and how often you're going to have the activities take place as a part of your event or whatever you're doing. Make sure to include where things are taking place. Be specific about your connection to the community. Try to avoid, like I said, general phrases or cliche statement like, I need $1,000 to feed the hungry. Instead of saying that, say, this proposal is going to be executed in Detroit, Michigan, in service of up to 100 to, to 200 individual men and women in the areas between 3rd Avenue and 5th Avenue, downtown Detroit, distributing foods and goods, including sandwiches, water, hygiene supplies like toothbrushes and toothpaste, and blankets from 3 to 6 p.m. every Thursday for the month of June. There it is. Make sure you're as specific as possible. Include dates, places, locations, numbers. Don't leave any of that out because the more specifics, the more successful you'll be. So, some key points to remember with your mini grants as we close out this mini grant presentation is that the funds are being allocated from a larger entity. So, usually with mini grants, and I'll give you all an example of one that I've participated in not only receiving mini grants, but also distributing mini grants. So, one that I received was from the Detroit Justice Center. The Detroit Justice Center received a grant from a larger foundation, and they had to redistribute that money to serve people who were being impacted by the coronavirus pandemic in 2020. This grant actually did not even need an application. They reached out to me individually to ask, hey, we saw that you were doing an action in service of incarcerated people because I had Corona Care Packs. You guys can look it up. It was something that I was already doing, and they wanted to support that. So you might already be doing good work, and someone just wants to support what you're doing and spread that. And then, speaking of spread, there was another grant that I participated in called Bread to Spread that was hosted by Spread the Vote. And that is an organization that is a large national organization that was redistributing funds to smaller grassroots organizations in order to provide resources to people at the polls while they were waiting in line. And that was something that people could apply for using a Google form. So, moving on, they're usually small, but small is relative. It could be $1,000 to, we'll say, $4,000 or $5,000 ish. Now, that's not small to me, but it could be small to a huge foundation like Wells Fargo or the McDonald's Foundation. Small is relative. The application process is much less intensive. So, as you notice, there aren't usually any stringent reporting requirements like what we saw with the government grants, where you have to do an audit and you might be audited by an organization on behalf of the grant. That's not going to happen with a mini grant. They're usually just going to take your word for what you did in the grant. And because the funds aren't huge, they're not really on the hook when it comes to ensuring that, thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars are being allocated in a specific way. They usually trust that you'll be able to allocate the $1,000, and the work is usually happening within a month. So they rather you focus on the specific targeted actions rather than putting so much effort and capacity towards reporting because it's such a quick turnaround. Make sure to be specific as possible. Don't make assumptions about what the grantor knows. You might think, oh, they know what downtown Detroit looks like. They know that there are folks who are there who could use hygiene materials and food. They might not. This grantor might live somewhere on the West Coast and have never been downtown Detroit. So be as specific as possible and don't make assumptions about what someone might know. Lay everything out plain and clear. Quantify every single thing that you can and be detailed about where and where things are happening and who specifically is going to be served. And like I said earlier, the grant allocation timeline is much quicker and more straightforward than larger grants. So when you find it, apply as soon as possible, be as specific as possible, and make your proposal as detailed as possible because often they're not really asking a ton of questions. They just want to get straight to the point and they want to get the money straight to you. So I really hope that this presentation has been helpful. Again, I'm Amani Sawari with Sawari Media, and this is the fourth part of the Get Grant series, where we get grants because we are gifted, enlightened, and transparent. Thank you.